A chilling truth lurks beneath the surface of American society. A shadowy network thrives, trading in human life itself. This is the world of organ trafficking, a grim marketplace where desperation fuels demand and vulnerability becomes a commodity. The human body, once sacred, is reduced to a collection of spare parts, a macabre inventory of hearts, livers, and kidneys, all priced and ready for the highest bidder. It preys on the sick and the poor, exploiting their desperation for profit. It undermines the ethical foundations of medical transplantation, turning life-saving procedures into grotesque acts of exploitation. It is happening here, in the United States, a silent epidemic hidden in plain sight. This is the story of that epidemic, an unflinching look at the underbelly of the American dream, where the pursuit of life intersects with the darkest impulses of human greed. The American dream, that alluring promise of prosperity and well-being, casts a long and complicated shadow. For some, it represents a beacon of hope, a chance at a better life. But for others, it becomes a breeding ground for desperation, a place where the lines between right and wrong blur under the weight of survival. The demand for organs in the United States is staggering. Thousands languish on waiting lists, their hopes dwindling with each passing day. This scarcity creates a breeding ground for an illicit market, where the laws of supply and demand take on a sinister twist. The desperation of patients, the exorbitant cost of legal transplants, and the perceived anonymity of the black market all contribute to the allure of this illicit trade. The organ trade thrives on exploitation, targeting the most vulnerable members of our society. Immigrants, undocumented workers, and the economically disadvantaged are lured into this dangerous world with promises of quick money, unaware of the risks and long-term consequences. Who are the players in this macabre theater of human suffering? They are as diverse as they are ruthless. This is not merely the work of shadowy criminal organizations, though their presence is undeniable. The network of organ trafficking extends far beyond, encompassing a complex web of individuals willing to exploit human life for personal gain. Corrupt medical professionals, driven by greed or their own twisted sense of morality, betray their oaths and participate in this illicit trade. Brokers, operating in the shadows, connect buyers and sellers, arranging the logistics of these gruesome transactions. Their motivations are simple: profit and indifference to the human cost. We will trace the roots of this illicit trade, following the path of organs from vulnerable donors to desperate recipients. The organ transplant system in the United States, while designed to save lives, is grappling with a silent epidemic, a severe organ shortage. The numbers tell a stark story. Thousands of Americans are currently on waiting lists for life-saving organ transplants. Each day, an average of 22 people die while waiting for an organ that never comes. As medical technology progresses, more patients with organ failure are eligible for transplants, increasing the demand. However, the supply of organs has not kept pace. This disparity between supply and demand creates a fertile ground for the black market to flourish. The desperation for a life-saving organ can lead individuals down a dangerous path, seeking alternative solutions outside the legal and ethical boundaries of the regulated transplant system. The organ shortage in the United States is not simply a matter of numbers. It's a reflection of systemic challenges and societal complexities. The current organ donation system, while well-intentioned, struggles to meet the growing demand. One of the primary obstacles is the reliance on deceased organ donation, which depends on individuals registering as organ donors and their families honoring their wishes after death. Despite increasing awareness campaigns, the percentage of registered organ donors remains insufficient to address the growing need. Many people harbor misconceptions about organ donation, leading to hesitation and reluctance to register. This complex interplay of factors places immense strain on the system, creating an environment where the allure of the black market can easily take hold. In the shadowy world of organ trafficking, human life is reduced to a commodity with a price tag attached to each vital organ. The cost of procuring an organ on the black market varies depending on factors such as the organ's condition, the urgency of the recipient's need, and the level of risk involved in the transaction. For recipients, the financial burden can be astronomical, often exceeding the cost of a legal transplant. Driven by desperation and facing limited options, individuals and families are forced to liquidate assets, accrue massive debt, or even resort to crowdfunding to afford a chance at life. This financial strain can have devastating long-term consequences, pushing families into poverty and jeopardizing their future. It preys on the desperation of the sick and the vulnerability of the poor, perpetuating a cycle of exploitation and injustice. It undermines the ethical foundations of medical transplantation, eroding trust in healthcare systems and casting a dark shadow over life-saving procedures. While statistics paint a grim picture of the organ shortage crisis, behind each number lies a human story. These are not just data points, they are individuals and families grappling with the toll of organ failure. Imagine the anguish of a parent watching their child slowly succumb to a disease that could be cured with a transplant. The supply chain of trafficked organs is a dark and twisted web, often ensnaring the most vulnerable members of society. These are individuals pushed to the brink, their circumstances making them easy prey for unscrupulous brokers who peddle false promises and exploit their desperation. Poverty is often the driving force, pushing individuals to view their own bodies as commodities, a means to alleviate their dire financial situations. Immigrants, particularly undocumented ones, are especially susceptible. Facing language barriers, limited economic opportunities, and the constant fear of deportation, they become easy targets for exploitation. Their precarious legal status often prevents them from seeking help, silencing their stories and perpetuating the cycle of abuse. The homeless, drug addicts, and those struggling with mental illness are also targeted. Their marginalized status and lack of support networks make them invisible to society, their disappearances easily overlooked. Connecting the desperate need for organs with the vulnerability of potential donors is a network of shadowy brokers, individuals who operate in the murky underworld of the organ trade. These brokers are the facilitators, the negotiators, the ones who connect the dots and arrange the transactions that fuel this illicit market. Their motivations are simple: profit and a chilling indifference to the human cost of their actions. They operate with a cunning blend of charm and coercion, preying on the hopes of recipients while exploiting the desperation of donors. They are masters of manipulation, skilled at identifying and exploiting weaknesses, using a combination of false promises, threats, and intimidation to get what they want. They operate across borders, using a combination of word-of-mouth referrals, online platforms, and connections within the medical community to facilitate these illegal transactions. Their ability to evade detection highlights the challenges law enforcement faces in combating this complex and often hidden crime. While this investigation focuses on the United States, it is crucial to acknowledge that organ trafficking is not confined by national borders. It is a global crisis, with tentacles reaching across continents, exploiting the desperation of the sick and the vulnerability of the poor on an international scale. The global nature of this crime is fueled by disparities in wealth, healthcare systems, and organ donation laws. Countries with weak governance, high levels of poverty, and limited access to healthcare often become hotspots for organ trafficking. Desperate individuals from these regions are lured to more developed nations with promises of better lives, only to find themselves trapped in exploitative situations where their organs are harvested without their full consent or with promises of compensation that never materialize. This global network is often facilitated by organized crime syndicates drawn to the lucrative nature of the trade and its relatively low risk of detection. While the role of individual actors in the organ trafficking trade is undeniable, there are also disturbing whispers and allegations of institutional complicity. These rumors, often circulating within marginalized communities and among those who have been directly affected by the trade, point to a more systemic problem, one that implicates those in positions of power. Allegations of corrupt medical professionals, willing to turn a blind eye to the origins of organs in exchange for financial gain, cast a dark shadow over the medical community. Stories of hospitals or clinics operating as fronts for organ trafficking rings, while often unconfirmed, fuel the fear and distrust surrounding the issue. These allegations, while difficult to prove, highlight the need for greater transparency and accountability within the medical field. The human cost of organ trafficking extends far beyond the physical act of organ removal. It leaves a trail of trauma that ripples through the lives of victims, their families, and communities. Victims who survive the ordeal often face long-term physical and psychological scars. The physical pain of surgery is compounded by the emotional distress of having been violated, their bodies treated as commodities. Many suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, haunted by the experience and struggling to rebuild their lives. The fear of retribution from traffickers, coupled with the stigma associated with organ trafficking, often prevents them from seeking justice or even sharing their stories. Their families are also left grappling with the aftermath. The fight against organ trafficking in the United States is a complex and often frustrating battle, waged on a legal landscape riddled with complexities and inconsistencies. While federal laws exist to prohibit the buying and selling of human organs, the intricacies of these laws, coupled with the clandestine nature of the crime itself, often hinder effective prosecution. The National Organ Transplant Act of 1984 stands as the cornerstone of legislation against organ trafficking in the US. This act makes it illegal to buy or sell human organs for transplantation, aiming to ensure that access to life-saving organs is based on medical need rather than financial means. However, the laws focus on the transaction itself, rather than the broader spectrum of exploitation involved, creates challenges for prosecution. Furthermore, variations in state laws regarding organ donation and transplantation create a patchwork of regulations that can be difficult to navigate and enforce. The very laws designed to protect the vulnerable from exploitation can sometimes be used to mask the true nature of organ trafficking. The legal definition of valuable consideration in the context of organ donation creates a gray area that traffickers often exploit. While NOTA prohibits the exchange of organs for valuable consideration, this term is not explicitly defined in the law, leaving room for interpretation and manipulation. Traffickers may disguise payments for organs as gifts or reimbursements for travel expenses or lost wages, blurring the lines between altruistic donation and illegal sale. This ambiguity makes it difficult for prosecutors to prove intent and secure convictions, further emboldening those who profit from this illicit trade. Additionally, the international nature of organ trafficking often complicates legal proceedings. One of the greatest challenges in combating organ trafficking is its inherent invisibility. These transactions often occur in the shadows, shrouded in secrecy and fear. Victims, often coerced or deceived, are reluctant to come forward due to fear of retribution, shame, or their own precarious legal status. This code of silence protects the perpetrators and allows the trade to flourish unchecked. The lack of reliable data on the prevalence of organ trafficking further hinders efforts to understand the scope of the problem and allocate resources effectively. Without clear evidence, law enforcement agencies face an uphill battle in building cases against traffickers. Proving organ trafficking is a complex endeavor, often requiring law enforcement to assemble circumstantial evidence and connect seemingly disparate dots. Unlike drug trafficking or other forms of organized crime, where physical evidence is often readily available, organ trafficking leaves behind few tangible traces. Proving that an organ was obtained illegally requires meticulous investigation, tracing the organ's journey from donor to recipient, uncovering financial transactions, and establishing intent to buy or sell. This burden of proof often falls on under-resourced law enforcement agencies, ill-equipped to handle the complexities of international investigations and the nuances of medical procedures. The specialized knowledge required to understand organ transplantation, coupled with the need for multilingual investigators and forensic experts, further complicates the process. Combating organ trafficking requires a multi-pronged approach, addressing both supply and demand. Strengthening legal frameworks and raising public awareness are crucial. Educating potential donors and recipients about the risks and ethical implications is essential. Increased funding and specialized training for law enforcement enhance their capacity to combat these crimes. Creating a culture of vigilance empowers communities to report suspicious activities and dismantle trafficking networks. The human body bears the brunt of organ trafficking's brutality. Victims who survive the ordeal often carry lasting physical and psychological scars, a testament to the violation they have endured. The surgical removal of an organ, often performed in clandestine and unsanitary conditions, can lead to a host of complications. Infections, chronic pain, organ damage, and even death are not uncommon consequences. The psychological trauma, however, often runs deeper, leaving invisible wounds that can take years to heal. The realization that their bodies have been violated, treated as mere commodities to be bought and sold, can be devastating. Many victims experience post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, haunted by nightmares, flashbacks, and a pervasive sense of fear and vulnerability. The loss of an organ can also have profound implications for their sense of identity and self-worth. The body, once a source of strength and vitality, becomes a reminder of their exploitation, a symbol of their powerlessness in the face of such a callous trade. The impact of organ trafficking extends far beyond the immediate physical and psychological trauma. Victims often find their lives irrevocably disrupted, their futures uncertain, and their dreams shattered. Many are forced to abandon their education, their careers, and their aspirations as they grapple with the long-term health consequences of their exploitation. The financial burden of medical care, coupled with the inability to work, can plunge victims and their families into poverty. The stigma associated with organ trafficking, often rooted in cultural taboos and misconceptions, can lead to social isolation, making it difficult for victims to rebuild their lives and reintegrate into their communities. The promise of a better life that lured many victims into this dangerous trade becomes a cruel irony, replaced by a reality of exploitation, hardship, and a constant struggle for survival. The very act of seeking to improve their lives, to escape poverty or pursue opportunities, becomes the catalyst for their descent into a nightmare they never could have imagined. The trauma of organ trafficking extends far beyond the individual victim, creating ripples of pain and suffering that radiate outward, impacting families and communities. The disappearance of a loved one, often under mysterious circumstances, leaves families grappling with unanswered questions, their lives thrown into turmoil as they desperately seek answers. The truth, when it emerges, can be even more devastating. The knowledge that their loved one was a victim of such a callous trade, their body exploited for profit, can shatter families, leaving them struggling to cope with feelings of guilt, anger, and betrayal. The loss of a breadwinner, a caregiver, or a child can have devastating economic and emotional consequences for families already struggling to make ends meet. The social stigma associated with organ trafficking often extends to the victim's family, leading to isolation, discrimination, and a reluctance to seek help or justice. For victims of organ trafficking, survival is often just the beginning of a long and arduous journey. The path to healing, both physically and emotionally, is fraught with challenges. Access to adequate medical care, often scarce or unavailable in their home countries, is crucial for addressing the physical complications arising from the organ removal surgery. However, the psychological scars often run deeper, requiring specialized trauma-informed care that is often culturally sensitive and tailored to their unique experiences. Support groups and counseling services can provide a safe space for victims to share their stories, process their trauma, and begin the slow and painful process of rebuilding their lives. Justice, however, remains elusive for many victims. The clandestine nature of the crime, the reluctance of witnesses to come forward, and the challenges of prosecuting international trafficking rings often hinder efforts to hold perpetrators accountable. Empowering victims, providing them with legal aid, and ensuring their voices are heard are essential steps in breaking the cycle of impunity and bringing those responsible to justice. Our journey into the heart of organ trafficking in the USA has exposed a chilling reality. Beneath American prosperity lies a grim trade in human flesh, driven by desperation and greed. We have witnessed the human cost, the shattered lives and broken bodies. The organ trade thrives on the vulnerability of the marginalized and the desperation of the sick. Even in a nation built on equality, the shadows of exploitation flourish. The demand for organs creates a breeding ground for a black market that preys on hope and profits from despair. The fight against organ trafficking is not for law enforcement alone. It demands a shift in perceptions and action from everyone. This issue can touch us all. Education is key. We must raise awareness and dispel myths. Healthcare professionals must uphold ethical standards. Silence is complicity. The fight against organ trafficking may seem daunting, a David versus Goliath struggle. Yet, even in the face of such darkness, there is hope. Shining a light on this illicit trade is a step towards justice. Increased funding and specialized training for law enforcement are crucial. We must dismantle trafficking networks and bring perpetrators to justice. International cooperation is equally critical. The most powerful weapon is the belief in the dignity of every human life. The fight against organ trafficking is a fight for humanity's soul.